Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name's Jen, and on my channel, I mainly talk about autism and ADHD. Today, we're going to talk about a phenomenon that likely has a higher occurrence in autism, ADHD, and OCD called limerence. I got the idea to make this video after lurking in some Reddit forums because it seemed to resonate with lots of autistic people. So, what is limerence? Limerence basically means having an intense romantic infatuation with another person. It's characterized by intensely longing for someone and having repetitive obsessive thoughts about them that are involuntary in nature. Usually, these feelings are felt towards someone who is unable to reciprocate those feelings. So it could be a person they've never met, like a celebrity, or someone they've only met a handful of times. However, in some cases, it could be someone they happen to be in a relationship with. The term was coined by psychologist Dorothy Tenov in the early 1970s after she conducted over 300 interviews to gather qualitative data on romantic love. And as she was conducting these interviews, she began to notice some people describing love in a similar manner, which was kind of this deep longing and obsession I just described. The object of their affection is typically referred to as the limerent object, or LO. Kind of strange to refer to another person as an object, but whatever. These guys are the experts here, not me. Anyway, people who are in limerence tend to constantly ruminate about their LO, and they may engage in activities like staring at photos of their LO, constantly checking their social media, or repeatedly rereading messages from them. They might also mentally replay past interactions with them over and over again, trying to find indications of how the other person might feel towards them. And these behaviors may get intense enough to interfere with their other responsibilities. One autistic person described their experience being in limerence like this. I'd gotten my first ever job in the food service industry. I found myself thinking about a particular coworker all the time, day and night. I would anticipate the days we were working together with excitement and extreme nervousness that sometimes resulted in physical symptoms. I began having strange thoughts or wishes that they could see me wherever I was, like an omnipresent being of sorts. I began looking for their car on the road whenever I was driving, hoping I would run into them at random places. I knew their birthday, favorite meals, favorite songs, you name it. I was too scared to initiate interaction though, so I just secretly hoped that one day they would notice me and give me the attention I craved more than anything else in the world. At home, I would cry because the obsession was taking over every aspect of my existence in a way that made me feel out of control. While limerence is usually described as romantic interest, it can also manifest as an infatuation with someone you're not romantically attracted to, like a peer or a colleague, which is referred to as Platonic limerence. And in the context of neurodiversity, I think this might come as a result of observing and mimicking the behavior of others to try to be more like them, or desiring the attention of someone else as an attempt to fit in. Think of a young autistic girl in middle school paying attention to how the popular girl walks, talks, and dresses, for example. She might have an entire binder of notes on Becky that she considers an instruction manual on how to human. But whether limerence is romantic or platonic, it causes extreme mood swings in the limerent individual. When their LO shows any amount of attention or affection, the limerent individual's mood soars to euphoric. But when they show disapproval or don't reciprocate, like maybe they don't respond to a text message, for example, their mood can plummet to extreme devastation. On average, these feelings towards a single person can last for 1.5 to 3 years, but any breadcrumbs of perceived or real affection left by the LO can intensify and prolong these fixations. And all of this can bring about unhealthy and damaging behaviors, like not attending to other relationships or their own individual needs, impaired productivity, and ignoring personal responsibilities, anxiety, depression, and emotional distress when feelings aren't reciprocated, physical manifestations like increased heart rate or changes to sleep patterns and appetite, increased social isolation, and a potential for stalking or harassment. So why is this more common in neurodiversity, you might ask? Let's go over the traits of autism, ADHD, and OCD to see how they intersect with limerence, making us more prone to it. And I think this quote from therapist Louise Taylor is a great starting point for this. Being neurodivergent is like living in high definition, and falling in love is an equally intense experience. Matters of the heart can be thrilling, confusing, and problematic. When living with conditions such as ASD, ADHD, or OCD, these experiences can become amplified and intensified. Which is true. As neurodivergents, we absolutely do feel things in an amplified way. We may not always be able to identify our emotions, but they're on volume level 75, whatever they are. Now, the connections I'm about to share are technically largely unstudied, so any correlations could be considered anecdotal. Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. But there is a lot of evidence and professional input supporting these connections. So first, let's look at the traits of autism, starting with hyperfocus. As autistics, we often develop intense fixations on specific topics or activities. We spend tons of time thinking about or learning about whatever it is that we're currently hyperfocused on. So it's not hard to see how this tendency to have a single focus lens and all-encompassing fascination can attach to a specific person. And just like any other special interest, they might find themselves thinking about that person from sun up to sundown, wanting to spend time with them and wanting to learn everything about them. Social communication deficits can play a role too, because missed social cues could cause an autistic person to misread or misinterpret the intentions of another person. An example of this might be an autistic person mistaking someone simply being polite or friendly as romantic interest. And these missed social cues can be dangerous because it can cause some of us to miss red flags, which creates an increased risk for unhealthy relationships, abuse, or mistreatment. Autism also causes difficulty with social interaction. This can lead someone with ASD to fantasize or daydream about relationships in secret because they struggle to establish and maintain them in real life. And in the context of Limerence, fantasizing about a relationship with someone can actually create a sense of comfort and emotional regulation. Now, that might seem contrary to my earlier mention of Limerence causing extreme emotional highs and lows, but that's in the real world, not in daydream land. Our fantasies don't carry the same unpredictability of a real-life relationship because we are the captains of that ship and we get to steer it in any direction we want it to go. And all too often, daydream land is a safe place many of us retreat to get away from a neurotypical world that causes us so much discomfort and stress. And finally, in the autism category is emotional dysregulation. When we have difficulty managing our emotions, it may mean we feel things more intensely for longer periods of time. Now let's look at some of the traits of ADHD that can increase the risk of limerence. And basically, many of the traits that contribute to limerence and autism are the same for ADHD, which isn't too surprising really, since there's a lot of overlap between these two conditions to begin with. Because ADHDers also have hyperfocus, emotional dysregulation, and the tendency to daydream. Matter of fact, people with ADHD usually have a pretty vivid imagination, and their minds tend to drift off and fantasize more often than their neurotypical peers. But there are a couple of unique ADHD features to add to this list. The first being rejection sensitivity, which, as we discussed earlier, is a major component of limerence. And the second is the additional risk of impulsivity, which can lead a person to act impulsively based on their feelings. Now, if you have the comorbidity of autism like me, the good news is your ASD may keep some of that ADHD impulsivity in check, although this is going to look different from person to person. But the bad news is that having both is also practically a perfect storm for experiencing limerence. Last but not least, let's look at how the traits of OCD can create an increased risk of limerence. And I think this one is probably a little bit more obvious because the key characteristics of OCD is obsessive intrusive thoughts, which is a lot of what limerence is. The repetitive thoughts around their LO are intrusive and occur without that person consciously intending them to. They just keep playing on repeat in their heads. So while limerence isn't technically OCD, it is still very easy to see how someone with obsessive compulsive disorder could get stuck in thought loops about a single person and anxiety cycles about reciprocated feelings. Now let's look at something really interesting here, because all three conditions share a fascinating physical similarity, which is imbalances of serotonin and or dopamine. And since strong feelings of attraction or affection is linked to chemical processes associated with neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, it's a possibility that people who have these conditions might be more affected by this aspect of limerence. It's almost like a medication in a way, trying to meet the deficits created by some of these chemical imbalances. You often hear about people with ADHD, for instance, seeking out dopamine-producing activities, and the excitement of a new relationship is a great source for this. Neurodivergent women are more susceptible to experiencing limerence on average. This may be in part because in neurodivergent males, their special interests might be on inanimate objects, which could be things like space, transportation, video games, or sports, while special interests in neurodivergent females might be more focused on relationships, socializing, or people, at least in comparison to their male counterparts. So as a young girl, they might develop a deep obsession with a celebrity or a peer they wish to mimic, or a crush. And because it seems like a normal thing for teenage girls to like, the level of their obsession goes unnoticed by parents and professionals. My little girl coded her own fan page website dedicated to Lance Bass. Look at this. She has a whole FAQ page on his place of birth and favorite foods. I mean, I had no idea she even knew how to code, but isn't this little crush so cute? Now let's look at just a few other ways limerence can be unhealthy. Because neurodivergent individuals often report a lower sense of self-esteem, they may be more vulnerable to chase after or settle for dysfunctional relationships. Most of us can relate to feelings of being rejected and ostracized in everyday life for as far back as we can remember. So this might make it easier for some of us to romanticize any relationship that comes our way. We also have increased empathy, which might lead to giving more chances to a partner's deception or harmful behaviors. This could be the result of insecure attachments, traumatic past experiences, or just that good old difficulty navigating and maintaining relationships overall. But again, this isn't a one-way street, because neurodivergents experiencing limerence, men and women, can engage in stalking behaviors or ignoring boundaries, putting the LO at risk. Unreciprocated feelings of rejection can result in a motivation to seek revenge, or to correct what they perceive as unjust treatment or unwanted contact to try to clear up their feelings of feeling misunderstood or not heard. A person with ASD may harass the LO in an attempt to get an apology or the original desired response of affection, which is why it's so important to recognize the signs of limerence in our ASD youth and adults in order to discuss boundaries and appropriate behavior. So, how can you know if you're in limerence or in love? Because on the surface, the two look very similar. Let's go over some of the key differences. Limerence is usually fleeting, whereas love grows over time. Limerence entails more intense and erratic emotions, whereas love involves a more stable emotional experience. Limerence is usually one-sided, meaning the other person doesn't usually reciprocate their feelings. When two people are in love, their affection is mutual. Those in limerence usually feel insecure about their connection, but those in love have a secure, healthy bond. People in limerence idealize the object of their affection, ignoring red flags or other imperfection. When you're in love, you're gonna have a more balanced and realistic view of your partner. Those in limerence think that the other person will save or complete them. When you're in love, you're usually whole on your own first. So a partner is an enhancement to your life, not the missing piece to your well-being. Individuals in limerence ruminate about the person they're infatuated with, trying to figure out how they feel about them. But people in love know where they stand with their partner due to healthy communication. And finally, in limerence, individuals find it difficult to carry out daily functions due to their all-consuming thoughts. Those in love, however, maintain their independence. Understanding these differences can help to identify as limerence and not love, so that it can be managed before it becomes too problematic. Now, some of you might be wondering, can limerence ever turn into a healthy relationship? And the answer is yes, but it's not common. And to get there, one has to let go of a whole bunch of unhealthy feelings and behaviors. Otherwise, it's still just limerence. But in the rare instances this does happen, it's important to realize that limerence will soon fade. All those adrenaline highs they felt are gonna go away. The pedestal they put their LO on is gonna be gone, and in its place will stand a regular human being, full of flaws and annoying habits. And the two individuals will find themselves in an ordinary relationship that will bring about occasional challenges and icks, as the kids like to say nowadays.
You are so old.
And according to neurodiverse relationship coach Mark Hutton, a similar process might actually happen in a lot of mixed neurotype marriages. In the early stages of the relationship, the neurodivergent person's special interest might actually be the person that they're dating. So the majority of their energy and thoughts are poured into their special interest. Once they're married, the neurodivergent's special interests oftentimes change, so now they begin to divest their energy into their new special interests. And this can leave the neurotypical partner confused as to why their spouse went from being hyper-focused on them to now seeming distant. This might seem like a Debbie Downer type of situation, but it's actually a really important point of understanding to better navigate these types of relationships, because it doesn't mean that the neurodivergent person has fallen out of love with their partner. Anyway, we'll begin to wrap it up, and I hope this was helpful in understanding the topic of limerence a little bit better. It might have seemed a little bit weird or maybe even uncomfortable, but I think it's important to discuss the real challenges of autism and ADHD. Some of you may have made the connection for the very first time today that this is yet another thing you didn't realize was tied to your neurodiversity. And if that's you, I hope you found relief in realizing you're not alone if you've experienced limerence. And the more dialogue we have on this, the better, because limerence can be especially damaging in the lives of neurodivergent people since it impacts us in areas we greatly struggle in. Social rejection, emotional dysregulation, and executive functioning challenges are already a huge part of the neurodivergent package. So limerence is like adding fuel to the fire of already strong emotions, rejection sensitivity, and social isolation. All right, let me know in the comments section. Have you heard this term before? Have you ever experienced limerence for someone else? Or maybe you've been the object of limerence of someone else at some point in your life? Or are you just relieved to know you're not crazy? Whatever it is, I invite you to share your thoughts, opinions, and experiences down below. All right, until next time, bye for now. Mwah. Isn't this little crush so cute?